There we go. We're live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Can AI Be Considered Alive? This is the debate show. The Academy debate show, that is. Edgelord versus Placeholder Films.
Egglord.
Okay.
Egglord, buddy. It's all
I
right.
always get that fucked up. Egglord versus Placeholder Films. This is my radio voice. Listen to my radio voice. Okay. Egglord is on the against side, and Placeholder Films is for the motion. So let's just jump right into it and stop wasting your time.
All right.
Okay.
Who wants to start?
So, Egg, did you want to begin, or would you like me to?
You want to flip a pancake for it?
Placeholder can.
Okay. So, I'm really glad that the title is correct because we are actually considering whether or not artificial intelligence can be considered life. Not is, but can.
Yeah.
Currently, no, there is no AI that's complex enough to be considered sentient, let alone alive. And sentience does not necessarily mean it's alive. And being alive obviously doesn't mean sentience because we appear to be one of the few species on Earth that has achieved this. Can we develop an artificial intelligence that is able to recognize itself, design a body for itself, or have a body that we design for it and be able to improve? I would argue that yes, if we were able to do so, and given the promise of computing in the next 30 years, perhaps we might eventually achieve that. I think it's less about whether or not we're talking human rights just yet, but talking merely whether or not it's alive. And there are plenty of animals that exist that don't appear to be aware of themselves, and there are plenty of plants that are obviously alive but don't move and can't move and recognize anything except for which way the sun is and which way is up. Then we have to consider what the qualities of life are required to be present. So obviously things like reproduction and it being able to extend its own existence through things like immune systems. And that's actually something that I'll bring up. We also need to consider whether or not it would be able to, like, if it produces waste, how is it going to do that without interfering with our ability to live? And what impact will that have on the environment? In addition to that, we have to consider whether or not it would be ethical to create such a thing. And that, I think, should be the last thing that we argue. So, in my view, we can, simply as a natural consequence of us being able to compute faster and faster and faster. We wind up developing these computers that are operate on such these insanely small scales. As we reach an end of what's called Moore's Law, we're now seeing that, oh, there's a brick wall ahead of us and we need to make a new computer. So that's what quantum computing and protein computing is about. And protein computing is about storing and encoding data within DNA for storage purposes and for processing. Mainly for storage currently. That's the most useful application for it. And then with quantum computing, we have the capability of building a network that is so sophisticated and so interwoven that perhaps it can generate its own thoughts after being exposed to enough information. Perhaps that the architecture will function such that it will think. We don't yet understand how our own brains think. So modeling these synthetic structures is not only a way for us to potentially create a new species, and if it's alive, it has to be considered a species and a new form of life, but also understanding our own brains and how we function and how we process information and perhaps what it is that we actually are. Sorry, that's the conclusion.
Okay.
Very perfect. That was good. You had 2 minutes left, so you did really well. Okay. Now let's get to Mr.
Egglord.
Egglord. Excuse me. I'm over here trying to drink to calm down.
I wish I had some.
Yeah.
Be so much more fun.
That was a very broad spectrum of topics.
Well, you know what they say about spectrums.
Well, my view is that machines we can't, first off, because we don't understand the qualifications that make, say, a consciousness. We can't actually replicate life. We can't replicate. We might be able to make a machine that can respond in complex manners, basically as a user interface. But we're not really able to produce an image, but rather a reflection. I'm broken. Fuck. The
Would you like me to narrow it down a little bit? I know I did mention like a lot of stuff.
yeah, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, that would help.
So, can I have like 2 minutes? And this does not count against Egglord's time.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So we're not talking human rights. We're talking just whether or not it could be recognized as alive. If we can build it to meet the criteria for life, should it not then be considered alive? We're not talking consciousness just yet. We're just merely talking life as we know it, life according to the essential, biological needs that we have synthetically. Can we build a brain that appears to operate in such a way that it appears to at least be aware of its surroundings and can navigate in original ways? It can problem solve and do complex tasks that require judgment. Can we program judgment? Can we program fear? Can we program appropriate responses to social and environmental factors? And in that way, we have a better understanding of what it means to be alive, now that we understand how we can build these things. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yeah. So basically, it's about whether we can consider the qualification. What we create be qualifiable for being considered life?
Yes.
Well, what are the qualifications of life? The basic high school example I was given was living things are made of cells. Living things obtain and use energy, grow and develop, reproduce, respond to their environment, adapt to their environment, maintain homeostasis and such. So, two of those are probably the most iffy from what I can, from my perspective. For one thing, cells. Unless we're starting from a purely biological substance, we can't really produce something that has cells. At the moment, we're only able to alter the chemical conditions inside of a living being. We're not able to actually create the cells themselves. We can only take existing cells and let them reproduce. And development is the other issue. If it's a machine purely made with mechanical plastic and metal parts, it can't really grow physically. it might develop responses as it might develop responses as, say, you program it to adapt intellectually, but it simply couldn't physically develop. So I would say we can't consider it life on that criterion. End statement, I suppose.
Perfect. That was 1 minute and 48 seconds left. Okay, from here, do you do counter arguments? That's from
Rebuttals.
Rebuttals, okay.
Hey, Dad, Kyle, you're really, really quiet, so...
Oh, I am? Right now?
Yeah.
Okay, let me see. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we go to rebuttals now, and who wants to go first?
I'll go ahead and go.
Okay, man.
Okay, so in terms of current technology, no. Artificial intelligence cannot be considered life. It's not complex enough. We're not complex enough in order to do so. There are many technological advances that are required in order for this technology to be realized. However, that does not say that it is impossible in the future. Under current projections, we should achieve, with a reasonable degree of certainty, artificial intelligence by 2039. That's the current projection for it, which means that AI is in the future. Not necessarily a living AI, but AI certainly. Intelligence might be independent of life, which would be a reasonable conclusion considering how much life there is that does not have an AI. How much life there is that doesn't have intelligence at all, or it doesn't appear to be aware in any way that we can measure. In regards to the biological necessity, we're currently working on using protein in order to apply it to a lattice that we've pre-designed. We use this for our hearts and they use stem cells for it. Now, there's no reason that we can't apply this technology to a non-biological matrix in order to make it, at the very minimum, have skin and be able to detect physical sensation. And that way, it'll be able to react to its environment in real time. That's the kind of technology we're going to need. Now, whether we can simulate that with electrodes currently, absolutely not. But there is some really promising research being done. We could possibly lay the groundwork for things like an artificial womb to be integrated into that system. So in that way, they would need to design the other half. And then they would be able to reproduce. There's no reason that we can't, through technology, build almost a homunculus and then its future generations be considered alive. It's not quite Borg and it's not quite iRobot. It's something different. It's an actual living construct. It's as complex or more so than we are. And it, I think, would be the pinnacle of technological achievement if we can actually unlock the secrets and maintain that technology. In terms of maintenance, before we begin to address the biological imperatives behind that, in terms of things like homeostasis, in terms of developing the fluids necessary to maintain and heal the body, we can teach it to maintain itself. In that way, it's able to continue its existence. We can do so much more than what we're currently able to imagine. And there are always different answers to this question. But I think that it would be premature to say that it is impossible for a machine to be considered alive. If we go purely on an intellectual basis, we've achieved a program that's about as complex as like a 6-year-old child. I mean, the Russians built one that was designed specifically to beat the Turing test that operated at about a 14-year-old's level linguistically. So every year we're becoming more and more powerful in understanding how the universe actually works and how we can apply it to computing and technology. I bring up protein computers because we might be able to use that as a reasonable stand-in for a brain. we could eventually print these computers to operate among these neural networks that we would be able to generate then through the use of stem cells. We can stimulate neurogenesis and give them a functioning brain. It's not that difficult to simulate what things do and how they might work. It's whether or not they will is the way we intend, or at least the way they work will be the way we want them to work. It won't be as intended sometimes. And that's just like with humans. There's no way we can determine from a very young age what a person's going to be like. So perhaps we can take these initial steps and begin to design a new thing. We couldn't call it a human. We couldn't call it a person. It'd be new, a new form of life.
Okay, that was perfect. Now, Egglord, sock it to us.
I'm hearing a lot of potentials. But as of yet, this is all in the realm of science fiction. We can't project the future accurately. That's
How would you define life to begin with, anyway?
well, life is a biological entity made of cells that can develop, that grows and eventually dies. I think if you were to remove even the potential for death, then you don't have a living creature per se. Would mortality be an issue with these golems? Would if they develop a consciousness, an ability to react to their environment, is it a true consciousness per se? Is it like our ability to conjure something out of thin air? Are we able to, would these entities be able to think complexly enough that they could write a story or do an art, make art?
Well, we already read science articles that are written by AIs. They use complex natural learning algorithms that wind up allowing them to generate original stories. If you'd like, I can send you in DMs an example of one of these articles, and it's always the ones that have kind of the weird but understandable typos, where they might have a word out of place. Those are generally generated by AIs.
So it's like those bots that
It's like a
that are
dyslexic
constantly
person reading.
Okay.
It's like a dyslexic person writing a science paper. It's really interesting to see how they work.
I was about to say, do these things catfish me on the internet?
I mean, if you liked Tay, perhaps.
But the thing that I can't quite get past is this seems more like
Theory instead of fact.
theory instead of fact. Not to say that it's not to say use the scientific definition of theory, but to say that this is all projection onto technology that we have, which does not demonstrate these qualities.
So the main bone of contention appears to be with considering sentient AI as alive.
Yeah.
As they lack a consciousness, they can't be considered alive. Would that be a fair summary of your position?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
The
It doesn't demonstrate consciousness,
1 minute.
yet it appears to move, and it appears to navigate an environment in such a way that it might be considered moderately intelligent. And it uses its environment to get what it wants. What did I just describe?
an animal.
An animal. Are animals intelligent? Are animals necessarily conscious or self-aware? Consciousness is not necessary for life. Now, in terms of the biological, who's to say that we wouldn't create an artificial intelligence that was intelligent enough to recognize the main difference between us and them and being biological, unless they would not, they wouldn't design their own gene code and allow for propagation of their own existence similar to the way that we do in terms of its reproduction.
But how would you prevent it from one of these entities from, say, consuming them all? like the Allied master computer, and I have no mouth and I must scream.
Is it right for us to interfere in the evolution of that species after we've created it?
Hmm.
5,
The ethical question.
3, 2, 1. That was really, really interesting. You both have some really good points, and I have a lot of questions, and Chair's probably got a lot of questions. So, Chair, you want to go first and ask a few of your questions?
I do not have good points, man.
I think that it was just hard for you to,
We only did the rebuttal, so if everyone wants like 2 minutes for final arguments, then
Oh yeah, I forgot the final argument. I'm sorry. Yeah, let's do those. How about it?
Hey, would you like to go first?
In closing, this is all the realm. This is all as yet projection of what could be rather than what will be. We can't decide. We can't look at what we have today and decide that it will become a living creature, because it just this is all theory. This is all whatever. Closing arguments. Jesus Christ.
Okay, so upon retrospect, I do recognize that the phrasing of the question is potentially biased in favor of one side rather than the other, and that's why I was trying to steer away from intelligent life and merely life.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a difference between intelligent life and mere existence. Like, animals merely exist. Plants merely exist. We live. We're intelligent. We can alter our environment. Plants can't do that in any constructive or destructive way other than to its own benefit. And that's similar to what we do, but we at least leave consideration for native species most of the time. However, it's the question still kind of remains, is it possible that an artificial intelligence could develop to the point where it becomes essentially alive? I happen to believe yes, simply because that appears to be where we're going in terms of developing neural networks, in terms of advancing into artificially intelligent machines and using algorithms that are increasingly, complex and are able to do more and potentially reaching judgment. I think that would be the first major hill that we would have to get over in order to determine if it's a viable project, and that's hopefully what the neural networks are going to be able to address because of how they learn. It's really interesting. what was it? Three brown, one blue did a very interesting video on it, and you should absolutely look at how neural networks work. I think he did a series on it, but the question I think can only be answered